My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 34 years old and I work as an ICU nurse in Columbus, Ohio. On the morning of my 10th wedding anniversary, I opened the door of our hotel suite in Charleston and found a woman standing there with a carry-on suitcase. Her name was Natalie. She worked with my husband, and apparently he had paid for her flight. First, I thought there had been some kind of emergency at work. That was the only explanation that made sense. My husband, Daniel, and I had planned this trip for almost a year. 4 days away. No work calls. No family obligations. Just us. Then Daniel came up behind me and smiled. Good. You found the place. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to Natalie. I remember looking at the small white luggage tag hanging from her suitcase. Her full name was printed beneath the airline logo. Natalie Mercer. That detail stayed with me because of what I would discover 3 weeks later. By then, I would know why Daniel had really brought her to Charleston. I would know why my mother-in-law had called me 2 days before the trip and asked a strangely specific question about our house. And I would understand why Daniel had suddenly become so interested in where I kept our marriage certificate. But standing in that hotel doorway, I knew none of that. I only knew another woman had arrived on my anniversary trip. When I asked Daniel why she was there, he gave me an answer I've replayed more times than I can count. Claire, she's my friend. Men need female friends. He said it casually, as if I were the one making the situation unusual. Before I tell you what happened next and how one unexpected guest exposed something much bigger than an inappropriate friendship, thank you for being here. If you enjoy quiet family stories where the truth reveals itself one detail at a time, subscribe and stay with me. 'Cause Natalie was not the real problem. She was the first clue. Daniel and I met 11 years earlier at a hospital fundraiser. I was 23 then, finishing nursing school. Daniel was 27 and worked as a financial analyst for a regional property development company. He was easy to talk to. Not charming in the obvious way. He remembered things. If I mentioned my mother had surgery on Thursday, he texted Thursday morning. If I said I liked cinnamon in my coffee, he remembered the next time we met. That kind of attention feels rare when you're young. We married 14 months later. For most of our marriage, I thought we were steady. Not perfect. Steady. Working in intensive care changes the way you notice people. You learn that what someone says matters less than what changes. Patient who suddenly stops complaining. A family member who avoids one particular question. A husband who starts placing his phone face down. Small changes. Daniel started mentioning Natalie about 18 months before our anniversary. First, she was simply someone from work. Natalie caught an error in the quarterly projections. Natalie thinks the Cincinnati project will get delayed. Natalie found this great Thai place near the office. Her name appeared slowly enough that I never questioned it. Then she became his work wife. I hated the phrase. Daniel thought it was funny. She keeps me organized, he once said. I was standing at the kitchen counter sorting mail when he said it. A grocery flyer was underneath an envelope from our mortgage company. I remember that because Daniel reached past me, took the mortgage envelope, and put it directly into his briefcase. He had never done that before. Something wrong with the payment? I asked. No. Just refinancing paperwork. I accepted the answer. I shouldn't have. 2 days before Charleston, Daniel's mother, Evelyn, called while I was packing. She was 63, a retired real estate agent, and the kind of woman who could make a question sound like casual conversation. Claire, she said, the house is still titled in both your names, correct? I stopped folding a dress. Yes. There was a brief silence. Then she laughed softly. Oh, never mind. Daniel mentioned some paperwork. I must have misunderstood. I asked what paperwork. She changed the subject. I filed the conversation away. Then Natalie appeared at our hotel. And while Daniel was explaining that she had been sent to Charleston for a last-minute client meeting, I noticed something through the open door behind her. Another hotel keycard, already inside a paper sleeve. Natalie saw me looking at it. Daniel saw it too. And for the first time that morning, neither of them had an explanation ready. Natalie recovered first. "The front desk gave me that when I checked in," she said. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. I looked at Daniel. "You knew she was staying here?" He rubbed the back of his neck. It was something he did when he wanted a conversation to feel less serious than it was. "Her meeting is at the hotel conference center." It made sense. That wasn't what I had asked. I noticed things like that. In the ICU, people often answer the question they wish you had asked. Families do it when they're afraid. Doctors sometimes do it when they're uncertain. Daniel did it when he was hiding something. I stepped aside and let Natalie into the suite. She was 31 and worked as a senior project coordinator at Daniel's company. She wore a cream blouse, dark trousers, and white sneakers. Everything about her looked practical and carefully chosen. She placed her suitcase beside the sofa. "I know this is awkward," she said. That was the first thing she said that morning that I completely believed. Daniel immediately started making coffee. He always became useful when he wanted to avoid being accountable. To understand why I didn't demand that Natalie leave, you need to understand the family I had married into. Daniel's father, Robert Bennett, was 66 and owned a small commercial appraisal business. He was quiet, methodical, and rarely disagreed with his wife in public. Evelyn, Daniel's mother, had spent 30 years selling residential real estate. She noticed money the way I noticed changes in vital signs. Then there was Daniel's younger sister, Megan. She was 29, an elementary school teacher, warm and chronically apologetic. Megan could be handed the smallest piece of cake at her own birthday dinner and somehow convince herself everyone else needed more. I liked her immediately when we met. Evelyn treated us very differently. First, the differences were small enough to dismiss. Christmas, Megan and I washed dishes while Daniel and Robert opened another bottle of wine. When Daniel forgot birthdays, Evelyn reminded me. When I forgot one anniversary card during a stretch of night shifts, Evelyn remembered for years. "Daniel works under so much pressure," she would say. I worked 12-hour ICU shifts. Somehow, mine never counted as pressure. That was the pattern. Nothing large enough to confront. Just hundreds of tiny adjustments, all bending in the same direction. Daniel was protected. Everyone else adapted. Natalie seemed to understand that instinctively. During our first afternoon in Charleston, she joined us for lunch. Daniel called it practical. "She doesn't know anyone here." I looked at him across the restaurant table. "She's here for work." Exactly. I almost laughed. Instead, I stirred the ice in my water. Natalie ordered the same sandwich Daniel did without opening the menu. I noticed that. Later, she reminded him not to order another coffee because it would aggravate his reflux. I noticed that too. But the strangest moment came when Daniel went to take a phone call. Natalie and I were alone. She folded her napkin carefully beside her plate. "You probably think this is inappropriate." "I think it's unusual." She nodded. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. For what it's worth, I told him I shouldn't come. That changed the shape of the situation. "Then why did you?" Her eyes moved toward the window. "Daniel said it was important." Before I could ask what that meant, he returned. Conversation ended. That evening, Natalie supposedly had her client dinner. Daniel and I finally had several hours alone. We walked along the waterfront as the sky turned gray over the harbor. I wanted to ask him directly what was happening. Instead, I asked a simpler question. "Why did your mother ask me about the title to our house?" Daniel stopped walking. Only for a second. But I saw it. "What?" She asked whether both our names were still on the title. He started walking again. "My mom gets confused about financial stuff." His mother had spent 3 decades handling property transactions. She did not get confused about titles. I said nothing. Back at the hotel, Daniel showered while I charged my phone. His laptop was open on the desk. I wasn't looking for anything. Then an email notification appeared in the corner of the screen. The sender was Robert, Daniel's father. The subject line contained only 4 words. Claire cannot know yet. I stared at it. The notification disappeared before I touched anything. A few minutes later, Daniel came out of the bathroom. I didn't mention the email. I wanted to know what people did when they believed they weren't being watched. The next morning, Natalie joined us for breakfast. Daniel went downstairs first. While I was looking for my room key, I noticed a folded sheet of hotel stationery near his laptop. There were several handwritten numbers. Our mortgage balance. The estimated value of our house. And beside both of them was another figure I recognized immediately. $187,400. It was almost exactly the amount my grandmother had left me when she died 6 years earlier. Money I had never combined with Daniel's accounts. At the bottom of the page, someone had written one short sentence. Need Claire's signature before August 1st. Our anniversary was July 19th. For the first time, I stopped wondering whether Natalie was having an affair with my husband. Whatever was happening was about something else. And somehow it involved my money, my house, and a signature Daniel needed from me. Reply next for part 3. I took a photograph of the page. Then I put it back exactly where I found it. That is one habit nursing taught me that has nothing to do with medicine. When something feels wrong, document first. Questions later. Breakfast, Daniel talked about our plans for the day as if nothing had changed. Carriage tour. Lunch near the market. Dinner at the restaurant where he had made our anniversary reservation. Natalie sat across from us drinking tea. Her client meeting apparently had been moved to the afternoon. Another small change. Another explanation I couldn't verify. I watched Daniel spread jam across a piece of toast. 10 years earlier, I would have asked him immediately about the numbers. But 10 years of marriage had taught me something I hadn't understood when we were newlyweds. Daniel was very good at explaining individual things. It was only when you placed all the explanations beside each other that they stopped making sense. I should have noticed that pattern much earlier. The first serious financial disagreement in our marriage happened after my grandmother, Ruth, died. She had raised me for several years when my mother was struggling financially, and we remained close until the end of her life. She left me $187,400. Daniel immediately suggested using most of it to pay down our mortgage. It wasn't an unreasonable idea. But something about the speed of his suggestion bothered me. The money had been in my account for less than a week. I want to leave it alone for now, I told him. He looked disappointed. Not angry. Daniel rarely showed anger when disappointment worked better. We're married, Claire. I thought we made financial decisions together. We do. Then why is this different? 'Cause it was the last thing my grandmother had given me. I couldn't explain that without sounding sentimental, so I simply said I wasn't ready. The money stayed in an account under my name. Daniel never openly argued about it again. But the subject never really disappeared. Over the years, he suggested investment properties, a larger house, a business opportunity with his father. Each idea somehow involved that same account. Each time I declined. Evelyn occasionally joined the conversation. Money sitting still loses value, she once told me over Thanksgiving dinner. Robert said nothing. He almost always said nothing. Megan looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. That was how the Bennett family handled tension. Evelyn applied pressure. Daniel made it sound reasonable. Robert stayed quiet. Megan tried to make everyone comfortable. And I mistook the absence of shouting for peace. There were other things I had forgotten until Charleston. 3 years earlier, Daniel asked me to sign documents related to refinancing our house. I read everything before signing. One page listed a home equity line of credit. I stopped. "What's this?" Daniel glanced at it. "Standard option. We don't have to use it." I refused to sign until it was removed. He seemed irritated for the rest of the evening. 2 weeks later, he apologized and brought home flowers. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. After breakfast in Charleston, Daniel left to take a call. Natalie watched him walk away. Then she turned to me. "Did he tell you about Northbridge?" I had never heard the name. "No." Her expression changed immediately. It was subtle, but I recognized it. The same look people get when they realize they have disclosed something they weren't supposed to. "What is Northbridge?" She reached for her tea. "You should ask Daniel." "I'm asking you." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she lowered her voice. "It's a property company." "Daniel's company?" "No." That answer bothered me more. "Whose?" Before she could respond, Daniel returned. Natalie looked down. I filed the name away. Northbridge. That afternoon, while Daniel and Natalie were supposedly at separate meetings, I called Megan. I didn't mention the hotel stationery. I asked whether she had ever heard of Northbridge. There was silence. Then she said, "Where did you hear that?" My hand tightened around the phone. "Why?" Another pause. "Claire, I think you need to talk to Daniel." That was the second person who had said that. Megan. She exhaled slowly. "Dad and Daniel started something a few years ago. Property investments, I think. Mom put money into it." "How much?" "I don't know." "Is Daniel an owner?" "I think so." I sat down on the edge of the hotel bed. My husband had apparently owned part of a property company for years. He had never mentioned it. Then Megan said something else. "Claire, there's something I should probably tell you." Her voice had changed. "Last Christmas, I heard Mom and Daniel arguing in Dad's office." "About what?" "Your grandmother's money." The room seemed suddenly very quiet. "What did they say?" "I only heard part of it." She hesitated. Then she repeated the sentence she remembered. "Mom told Daniel that if you wouldn't invest willingly, he needed to find another way to unlock the equity." I looked toward the desk where I had found the handwritten numbers. My inheritance. Our mortgage. Our home value. Need Claire's signature before August 1st. Those numbers were no longer random. They were a plan. But I still didn't understand why Natalie was involved. That answer came sooner than I expected. When I returned to the hotel that evening, Natalie was standing alone outside our suite. She looked frightened. In her hand was a thick envelope. She held it out to me. "Daniel asked me to bring this to Charleston." I didn't take it immediately. "What is it?" She looked toward the elevator before answering. "Documents for you to sign tomorrow." Then she said the one thing that made every detail of the trip suddenly feel deliberate. "Claire, I don't think Daniel brought you here for your anniversary." Reply next for part 4. I took the envelope from Natalie. It was heavier than I expected. My name was typed on the front. Claire Bennett. Nothing else. "What exactly did he ask you to do?" Natalie glanced toward the elevator again. "Can we not talk here?" We went downstairs and found a quiet corner near the hotel courtyard. There were 3 people at the bar and an older couple reading near the windows. Ordinary hotel sounds surrounded us. Ice dropping into glasses. Low music. Suitcase wheels crossing tile. Natalie sat across from me. For the first time since she arrived, she looked less like Daniel's polished coworker and more like someone who had realized she had stepped into something she didn't understand. "I need you to know something," she said. "Daniel didn't pay for my flight personally." "Who did?" "Northbridge." I said nothing. She noticed. You know about it. I know the name. Natalie pressed her lips together. She explained that Daniel had asked her to travel to Charleston because she was familiar with several property files connected to Northbridge. Her role at Daniel's regular employer sometimes involved coordinating outside investment projects. That explanation was complicated enough to sound plausible. But one detail wasn't. Why bring documents to my anniversary trip? He said you already knew. I didn't. Her face changed again. That was becoming a pattern. Natalie knew enough to be useful. Not enough to understand what she had been helping with. I opened the envelope. Inside were property documents, loan forms, and several pages filled with language I had to read twice. One document listed our home as collateral. Another referenced Northbridge property holdings. Then I found a signature page. My name was already printed beneath the blank line. Daniel's signature was beside his. I kept reading. The proposed loan amount was $420,000. I felt strangely calm. That happens sometimes when something is worse than you expected. Your mind becomes practical. I photographed every page. Then I asked Natalie one question. Why does this need to happen before August 1st? She looked surprised. You know about the deadline? I saw something. She hesitated. Northbridge has a loan coming due. How much? I don't know the exact amount. But they can't pay it. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. That evening was supposed to be our anniversary dinner. I considered canceling. Instead, I went. I wanted to see what Daniel would do. The restaurant was small, with white tablecloths and candles inside glass holders. Daniel ordered champagne. He gave me a bracelet. Then, halfway through dinner, he placed a leather folder beside my plate. I have something boring we should handle while we're here. There it was. He smiled. Refinancing documents. I looked at the folder. On our anniversary? He laughed softly. I know. Romantic. I didn't touch it. What are we refinancing? The house. Why? To get a better rate and restructure a few things. A few things. I had already read the documents. He was asking me to secure a $420,000 obligation against our home. I looked at him across the candlelight. Is Northbridge one of those things? His expression stopped moving. Only for a moment. But I saw it. Who told you about Northbridge? Not what is Northbridge. Who told you? That distinction mattered. I leaned back. You never mentioned owning a property company. It's barely a company. Then why does it need our house? He lowered his voice. Claire, this isn't the place. You brought the paperwork here. He looked toward the tables beside us. Then he said something I still remember word for word. My parents have everything tied up in this. We all need to make sacrifices. All. Except I had never agreed to be part of it. I asked how much Northbridge owed. Daniel didn't answer. I asked whether his parents had invested their retirement savings. Again, nothing. Then I asked the question that finally made him look nervous. Does Natalie know? His hand tightened around his water glass. Why would Natalie know? 'Cause she had carried the documents. 'Cause Northbridge had paid for her flight. 'Cause she knew about the deadline. But I didn't tell him any of that. I simply said, you brought her here. Daniel leaned back. This again? Then came the sentence he apparently thought would end the conversation. Men need female friends, Claire. You're making Natalie into something she isn't. I looked at him for several seconds. You're right. He seemed relieved. Natalie isn't the problem. His relief disappeared. I stood, picked up my purse, and left the folder untouched. When I returned to the hotel, Natalie was gone. Her suitcase was no longer beside the sofa. First, I thought she had decided to leave Charleston. Then I saw an envelope pushed beneath our door. Inside was a photocopy of an old Northbridge document. It was dated 3 years earlier. The bottom were 4 names: Robert Bennett, Evelyn Bennett, Daniel Bennett, and mine. Beside my name was a signature. It looked almost exactly like mine. Almost. But I had never signed that document. Reply next for Part 5. I did not confront Daniel that night. I called an attorney. Her name was Rebecca Sloan. She was 42 and specialized in real estate and financial disputes. I knew her through the hospital because she had once helped a colleague resolve an estate problem after her father died. Rebecca was direct. She listened without interrupting while I explained the loan documents, Northbridge, the signature, and my grandmother's inheritance. Then she asked one question. Do you have copies? Yes. Send them to me. Don't sign anything. I emailed everything from my phone. Daniel returned to the hotel 20 minutes later. He was quiet. So was I. The next morning, Rebecca called at 7:12. I remember the exact time because Daniel was asleep beside me. I went into the bathroom and turned on the exhaust fan. The old document is important, she said. It appears to be a personal guarantee connected to Northbridge. I never signed it. Then we need the original. She also told me to check our county property records, credit reports, and any financial statements I could legally access. I started with public records. Northbridge had been formed 3 years earlier. Its registered address belonged to Robert's appraisal business. Daniel was listed as a manager. Then I found something I wasn't expecting. Northbridge had purchased 3 properties. 2 had been sold. 1 remained. Commercial building outside Columbus. The mortgage on that building had been modified twice. The most recent filing was 6 months earlier. I sent everything to Rebecca. Then I checked my credit. No unknown loans. That was a relief. It lasted about 4 minutes. Rebecca called again. Claire, the signature on that document may not have created a loan in your name. It may have been used to make Northbridge look stronger financially. Using what? Potentially your household assets. Our house. Maybe my inheritance. I thought about Evelyn asking whether the title was still in both our names. The mortgage envelope Daniel had taken from the kitchen. The refinancing papers 3 years earlier. Pattern was becoming visible. But there were still missing pieces. Natalie called me just before noon. She had moved to another hotel. I'm sorry, she said. For what? For assuming you knew. I asked where she had found the old document. In Daniel's Northbridge folder. Why did you have access to it? She hesitated. Then she told me something that changed my understanding of their relationship. Daniel had asked Natalie months earlier to organize Northbridge records outside her normal job duties. He told her his father was preparing to retire and the files were a mess. She helped because Daniel was her supervisor. The work-wife joke had started in their office. Daniel encouraged it. Natalie tolerated it. But according to her, they had never been romantically involved. I believed her. Not because I trusted her completely. 'Cause her discomfort finally made sense. Daniel had used the appearance of closeness as camouflage. If I became suspicious, he could make the argument about jealousy. Not paperwork. I asked Natalie whether she had seen anything involving my inheritance. There was silence. Then she said, There's a financial statement. What kind? One submitted to a lender. My pulse changed. How much does it list under liquid assets? She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, About $187,000. Closed my eyes. The exact amount wasn't a coincidence. My grandmother's money had been represented as part of the financial strength behind a company I didn't even know existed. Can you send it? I already did. The email arrived seconds later. The document was dated 2 years earlier. At the bottom was Daniel's signature. Under household assets, it listed our home equity, retirement accounts, and $187,400 in cash reserves. My separate inheritance. Rebecca reviewed it that afternoon. She warned me that listing an asset did not necessarily mean Daniel had legally transferred or pledged it. But combined with the disputed signature, it raised serious questions about what representations had been made to lenders. Called my bank next. My inheritance account was untouched. Every dollar was still there. That should have comforted me. Instead, it clarified something. They had not taken the money. They had been trying to gain access to enough equity to rescue Northbridge before its debt came due. And they needed me to sign willingly this time. The anniversary trip suddenly made sense. A beautiful hotel. Champagne. A bracelet. Distance from home. Documents presented as routine refinancing. It wasn't romance. It was timing. That evening, I received a message from Megan. Can we talk somewhere Daniel won't know about? We met the following morning at a coffee shop after I flew home alone. Megan arrived carrying an old blue notebook. She placed it on the table between us. This was Dad's, she said. Inside were handwritten records of Northbridge payments, dates, loans, transfers, initials. One entry appeared repeatedly. CB funds pending. My initials. Beside the most recent entry was a date, August 1st. And beneath it, Robert had written 6 words. Claire refuses, Evelyn has backup. I looked at Megan. What backup? Her face went pale. I think I know. Then she told me we needed to go to our parents' house before Evelyn realized the notebook was missing. Reply next, 4 part 6. Megan drove. Neither of us spoke much. Robert and Evelyn lived 20 minutes outside Columbus in the same brick house where Daniel and Megan had grown up. I had been there hundreds of times. That morning it felt different. Maybe houses always do once you realize people have been keeping secrets inside them. Megan parked around the corner. Mom has a dental appointment, she said. Dad should be at work. You still have a key? She nodded. I didn't like entering their house without permission. Rebecca liked it even less. When I called her from the car, she was very clear. Do not take anything that doesn't belong to you. Do not open locked containers. Photograph only documents Megan has lawful access to or records voluntarily shown to you. So we went inside carefully. Kitchen looked exactly as it always did. A bowl of lemons on the counter. Robert's reading glasses beside the newspaper. Calendar hanging near the pantry. Ordinary details can feel almost insulting when something serious is happening. Megan led me upstairs. My old room. Inside her closet were 3 storage boxes she had never moved out. The blue notebook had been in one of them. Robert had apparently used the room for overflow paperwork after Megan left home. She opened another box. Tax records. Old property brochures. Bank statements. Nothing with my name. Then Megan remembered something. Mom keeps copies of everything she gives people. That sentence stayed with me. Downstairs, she opened a cabinet in the family room where Evelyn stored old Christmas cards, warranties, and household files. Megan pulled out a folder marked family. Inside were copies of birth certificates, insurance information, and old emergency contacts. Then I saw a photocopy of my driver's license. I had given Evelyn a copy years earlier when she booked a family cruise. Behind it was another page. My signature. Repeated 6 times. Not on contracts. Just my signature written across a blank sheet. I felt cold. Megan stared at it. Claire. Photograph it. I didn't touch the page again. Rebecca called while we were still there. I described what we had found. Her response was immediate. Leave the house. We did. By afternoon, Rebecca had arranged for a forensic document examiner to compare the questioned Northbridge signature with verified samples. That process would take time. But we no longer needed to guess what Evelyn's backup might mean. Someone had collected examples of my signature. Question was whether they had used them. Daniel called me 11 times that day. I answered once. "Where are you?" "At home." "I came home." "You're not here." I looked across Rebecca's conference room. She shook her head slightly. "I needed space." Daniel exhaled. "You're turning paperwork into a conspiracy." There was that word. Conspiracy. I had never used it. Then explain Northbridge. Silence. Finally, he said, "It was an investment that went badly." "How badly?" "Claire." "How much?" He paused. "Just under 900,000. I wrote the number down. "Who owes it?" "My parents and I." "Then why do you need my signature?" Another silence. "Because the house has enough equity to restructure the debt." "Our house." "Not his. Ours." "And my inheritance?" He answered too quickly. "No one touched your inheritance." Again, he answered a question I hadn't asked. I looked at Rebecca. She had heard it. "I didn't ask whether you touched it." Daniel stopped talking. That silence told me more than another explanation would have. After the call, Rebecca began building a timeline. 3 years earlier, Northbridge was formed. Soon after, the questionable guarantee appeared. 2 years earlier, my inheritance was listed on a lender's financial statement. 6 months earlier, Northbridge modified its commercial loan. Now that loan was approaching a deadline. Daniel needed my genuine signature on new documents before August 1st. Every clue pointed in the same direction. But one thing still bothered me. Why now? Why couldn't Northbridge simply sell the remaining building? Rebecca searched the property records more closely. Then she found a pending legal filing involving the property. A contractor had sued Northbridge over unpaid renovation work. The amount was substantial. Selling quickly would not solve everything. That evening, Megan called again. Her voice was shaking. "Dad knows I took the notebook." "How?" "Mom called me." "What did she say?" Megan repeated it exactly. She said, "You have no idea what you've done to this family." That sentence told me Evelyn wasn't confused. She knew. The next morning, Robert contacted me for the first time. Not Daniel. Not Evelyn. Robert. He asked to meet privately. Rebecca advised me not to go alone. We met in her office. Robert looked older than he had a week earlier. He sat down, placed both hands on the table, and stared at them. Then he said, "Claire, Daniel didn't forge your signature." For one brief second, I felt relief. Then Robert looked up. "Evelyn did." He reached into his jacket and placed a flash drive on the table. "And that isn't the worst thing she did." Reply next for part 7. Robert did not touch the flash drive again. He left it between us as if distance from it mattered. Rebecca asked the first question. "What's on this?" Robert looked at me. "Emails. Canned documents. Financial records." "How did you get them?" "They're copies from my business computer and Northbridge files. Records I had access to." His voice was quiet. Robert had always been quiet. For years, I had mistaken that trait for gentleness. I was beginning to understand that silence could also be cooperation. Rebecca plugged the drive into an isolated computer. The first folder was labeled by year. Inside were emails between Robert, Evelyn, and Daniel. The earliest messages began shortly after Northbridge was formed. First, they looked ordinary. Property listings, renovation estimates, loan discussions. Then Rebecca opened an email from Evelyn. The subject line was, "Claire assets." My stomach tightened. The message discussed my inheritance. Not emotionally. Numerically. Evelyn had calculated how much equity Daniel and I had in our home and added the balance of my inheritance account based on a bank statement Daniel had apparently seen. She described both as available family strength. I read that phrase twice. Available. As though everything I owned automatically belonged to whatever problem the Bennett family created. Another email contained the scanned guarantee. The one with my false signature. Daniel had replied. She won't agree if we ask now. We need another solution. Robert responded. Do not involve me in signatures. For a moment that seemed like a defense. Then Rebecca opened his next email. Just get the lender what they need. Robert closed his eyes. I knew something was wrong, he said. You knew enough, I replied. He nodded. There was no argument. That mattered to me. Not because it excused him. 'Cause for once, someone in that family wasn't trying to change the meaning of what I could see. Then we found the document that explained the entire anniversary trip. Northbridge's lender had discovered inconsistencies while reviewing its refinancing application. The old guarantee connected to me could not simply be relied upon again. The lender required updated, properly executed documents. My real signature. The deadline was August 1st. Without new financing, Northbridge faced default. And Daniel had been assigned one job. Get me to sign. The trip to Charleston had been Evelyn's idea. An email from 6 weeks earlier said, make it feel like an anniversary decision, not a business decision. She'll be more receptive away from home. I sat very still. Rebecca continued reading. The bracelet. The hotel. Even the timing of dinner. None of it had been accidental. Then Natalie's name appeared. Evelyn had suggested sending someone from Daniel's office with the documents so everything would appear routine. Daniel chose Natalie because she already organized Northbridge files. That was why she had been flown to Charleston. Not because Daniel needed a female friend. Not because of a client meeting. She was there to transport paperwork and help make the transaction look ordinary. The affair I had briefly suspected had never existed. Truth was less dramatic. And much worse. My husband had used another woman as a distraction while trying to put our home behind nearly $900,000 of family debt. But Robert had said there was something worse. Rebecca asked him what he meant. He pointed to another folder. Backup. Inside was a draft document. Not signed. Not filed. A proposed agreement transferring part of Daniel's interest in our house to a family trust controlled by Evelyn and Robert. Rebecca read it carefully. Then she looked at Robert. This wouldn't work without Claire's consent. I know. So what was the plan? Robert swallowed. Evelyn believed they could use the old guarantee and other documents to pressure Claire if she refused. Make her think she was already legally exposed. I finally understood. They did not necessarily need to steal my inheritance. They needed me to believe I had no safe alternative. If I refused to sign, they planned to show me the old documents bearing my forged signature and tell me I was already responsible. Then the new loan would be presented as the only way to protect our home. It was manipulation built on a forgery. Trap designed to make consent look voluntary. I looked at Robert. How long did Daniel know? His answer came immediately. From the beginning. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I still believed Daniel was innocent, but some part of me had assumed Evelyn was controlling him. That he had been pressured too. Robert removed a folded paper from his pocket. There's one more thing. It was a handwritten note from Daniel. Robert said Daniel had given it to Evelyn 2 months earlier after they argued about the refinancing. The first line read, Claire refuses again, remind her the old guarantee puts the house at risk. I recognized Daniel's handwriting. Below that was another sentence. She trusts paperwork more than people. Use that. I stared at those words for a long time. He was right about one thing. I did trust evidence. And now I had enough of it. Rebecca began making copies. Robert agreed to provide a formal statement. The document examiner would later confirm that the signature on the guarantee was not mine. By the end of that afternoon, the story Daniel had built around me had collapsed. There had been no misunderstanding. No harmless refinancing. No confused mother. No innocent anniversary surprise. There had been a coordinated attempt to use my assets to rescue a failing family investment. And my husband had participated willingly. 6:40 that evening, Daniel texted me. "We need to settle this as a family. Mom and Dad are coming over tomorrow." I showed Rebecca. She read it once. "Do you want to go?" I thought about that. Then I looked at the printed emails spread across her conference table. For 10 years, every difficult conversation in Daniel's family had been shaped by whoever controlled the room. Tomorrow would be different. "Yes," I said. "But they're not coming to my house." I sent Daniel an address. Rebecca's office. Then I added one sentence. "Bring Evelyn. Bring every document you planned for me to sign." 3 dots appeared on my screen. Disappeared. Appeared again. Finally, Daniel replied. "Claire, you don't understand what you're doing." I looked at the evidence in front of me. For the first time in our marriage, I understood exactly what I was doing. Reply next, 4 Part 8. Daniel arrived first. Evelyn came 5 minutes later. She was carrying her usual leather handbag and wearing a navy jacket I had seen at Christmas dinners and birthday lunches for years. Nothing about her suggested panic. That was very much like Evelyn. Even when things were falling apart, she preferred to look as though she had scheduled them. Robert was already inside with his own attorney. Megan had chosen not to attend. I understood why. Rebecca sat beside me. On the table were copies of the guarantee, the financial statement listing my inheritance, the anniversary refinancing documents, and several emails from the flash drive. Daniel looked at the papers. Then at his father. "You gave her the files?" Robert nodded. Daniel said nothing else. Evelyn sat down slowly. "This has gone far enough." Rebecca answered before I could. "I agree." The room became quiet. Evelyn looked at me. "Claire, Northbridge was a family investment. It encountered problems. No one was trying to steal from you." I placed the old guarantee in front of her. "Did you sign my name?" She didn't look down. "I handled paperwork for the family." "That wasn't my question." Daniel shifted in his chair. "Claire, Mom made a mistake." "A mistake?" I had heard that word used for spilled coffee. Missed appointments. Wrong turns. Not deliberate signatures. Rebecca placed the preliminary document examiner's findings beside the guarantee. "The signature is inconsistent with Claire's verified samples." Evelyn finally looked at the page. Then she said something revealing. "The lender never lost money because of that document." Rebecca's expression did not change. No one asked whether the lender lost money. Evelyn stopped speaking. I noticed Daniel looking toward his mother. For years, they had been effective because they supported each other's version of events. Now each sentence created another problem. I placed the financial statement on the table. "Why was my inheritance listed here?" Daniel answered. "It was a household financial statement. It was my separate account. We're married." "Yes." I waited. He seemed to expect more. There wasn't more. Marriage was not an answer to every question. Rebecca then placed the Charleston loan package in front of him. "Did you intend for Claire to sign these documents during the anniversary trip?" Daniel leaned back. "I intended to discuss them. After presenting them as refinancing, they were refinancing. Refinancing that secured Northbridge debt." He looked at me. "We would have protected the house." "With what?" He didn't answer. That was the problem with facts. Eventually, explanations run out. Evelyn tried a different approach. She turned toward me. Do you understand what happens if Northbridge defaults? Yes. Robert could lose most of his retirement. Robert spoke for the first time. That's my responsibility. Evelyn looked at him sharply. He continued. We made the investment. That single sentence changed the room. Not because it was dramatic. 'Cause it was accurate. Evelyn's face hardened. We made decisions for this family. No, I said. You made decisions about my property without me. She looked directly at me. You benefited from this family for 10 years. I thought about that sentence. Then I asked how. She seemed surprised. I waited. How did I financially benefit from Northbridge? She had no answer. Daniel interrupted. This isn't helping. I turned to him. Did you know my signature was false? He looked down at the table. Daniel. His voice was quiet. Eventually. When? He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the folder. After Mom submitted it. And you reported it? No. Corrected it? No. Told me? No. Chancer was smaller than the one before. Then Rebecca opened the email containing Daniel's handwritten instructions. She slid the copy toward him. She trusts paperwork more than people. Use that. He stared at it. For the first time, he looked genuinely ashamed. Not angry. Not defensive. Just exposed. I was under pressure. I believed him. That did not make him innocent. Pressure explains what you felt, I said. It doesn't change what you did. No one spoke. Rebecca then explained what would happen next. I would not sign the refinancing. I would formally dispute the forged guarantee. My attorney would notify the appropriate parties that I contested any document bearing an unauthorized signature or representation of my assets. My inheritance account would remain untouched. And I had already taken steps to protect my credit and financial records. Evelyn's composure finally cracked. Not loudly. She simply looked at Robert and said, You destroyed us. Robert shook his head. No. We did this before Claire ever found out. That was the closest thing to accountability I had ever heard from him. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes. No one shouted. There were no dramatic confessions. Just documents. Dates. Signatures. Emails. By the end, every lie had somewhere concrete to land. As Daniel stood to leave, he stopped beside me. Are you coming home? I looked at him. 10 years earlier, that question would have meant something simple. Home was where we lived. Now I understood that a house and a safe place were not always the same thing. No. He nodded once. Then he left. Evelyn followed without looking at me. Robert remained with his attorney. Outside Rebecca's office, rain had started tapping against the windows. I watched it for a while. I thought the confrontation would make me feel victorious. It didn't. Mostly I felt tired. Then Rebecca returned from speaking with Robert's attorney. She closed the door. There's been another development. I looked at her. The Northbridge lender has responded to our notice. What did they say? She sat down. They're opening a formal review of the guarantee and financial statements. I expected that. But then she continued. And Claire, the lender, found another document with your name on it. I stared at her. What document? Rebecca turned her laptop toward me. It was submitted 18 months ago. The bottom of the page was my name. And above it was something I had never agreed to guarantee. A debt far larger than the one Daniel had tried to put in front of me in Charleston. Reply next for Part 9. The document was a personal financial statement. First, it looked almost identical to the one Natalie had sent me. My name. Daniel's name, our home, retirement accounts, my inheritance. But there was one important difference. The bottom, beneath a certification stating that the information was accurate, were two signatures. Daniel's was real. Mine was not. The statement had been submitted when Northbridge applied for an expanded credit facility 18 months earlier. The approved amount was $1.2 million. I looked at Rebecca. Am I responsible for that? Not simply because your name appears here. She spoke carefully. The lender is investigating how the document was submitted and what representations were made. We'll formally dispute your signature and any claim that you authorized the use of your separate assets. That distinction mattered. For days, I had been afraid every discovery would somehow become my debt. Now, for the first time, consequences were beginning to move toward the people who had actually made the decisions. The lender froze further refinancing discussions. Northbridge missed its August deadline. The commercial property entered a formal workout process with the lender, and Robert hired an independent attorney to separate his interests from Evelyn's and Daniel's. The unpaid contractor lawsuit continued. Nothing disappeared overnight. Real consequences rarely arrive that neatly. They come as letters, deadlines, attorney calls, counts under review, long meetings in rooms with bad coffee. I returned to work. That helped more than I expected. The ICU did not care about my marriage. Monitors still sounded. Families still waited beside beds. Medications still had to be checked twice. There was comfort in work that required facts. At home, Daniel and I communicated through attorneys about finances and through short messages about practical things. He moved into a furnished apartment. I stayed in the house temporarily while ownership and financial issues were reviewed. One evening, I found his anniversary gift still sitting in its box. The bracelet. I stared at it for a while. Then I closed the drawer. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't important. That realization felt strangely freeing. Natalie resigned from Daniel's department 2 weeks later. She called me once. I should have questioned more, she said. You didn't know what they were doing. I knew enough to think something felt strange. I understood that feeling. I had lived with it for years. Before we ended the call, she told me Daniel had been placed on administrative leave while his employer reviewed whether company time or resources had been used for Northbridge business. I didn't feel satisfaction, just confirmation. Actions were finally producing consequences without me having to create them. Evelyn contacted me only once. She sent a 4-paragraph email. Most of it explained pressure. Robert's retirement. The failed property, interest rates, Daniel's fear, her belief that Northbridge would recover if they could just get more time. Near the end, she wrote, I never intended for you to lose anything. I read that sentence several times. Then I forwarded the email to Rebecca. Intent was no longer the question. Megan and I became closer. For years, I had thought her constant apologizing was simply part of her personality. Now I understood where it came from. She had grown up in a family where keeping peace meant absorbing discomfort before someone more powerful had to feel it. One Sunday, we sat in my kitchen drinking coffee. The same kitchen where Daniel had once taken that mortgage envelope from the counter. Megan looked toward the empty chair where her brother used to sit. I always thought you were the strong one. I smiled slightly. I didn't. She looked surprised. Truth was, I had confused endurance with strength for a long time. I thought being reasonable meant giving people endless opportunities to explain themselves. I thought calm meant staying. It doesn't. Sometimes calm is simply knowing enough to leave. The forensic examiner eventually issued a final report concluding that the disputed signatures were not mine. My attorney provided the findings to the lender and the relevant investigators reviewing the documents. Robert gave a formal statement. So did Natalie. Megan turned over the notebook through the proper legal process. The evidence no longer depended on my word against theirs. That mattered. Daniel asked to meet with me privately. First, I refused. Then, after speaking with Rebecca, I agreed to meet in a public cafe. He looked different. Not dramatically. Just tired. There were gray strands near his temples I had somehow never noticed. "I'm sorry," he said. I waited. "I kept thinking I could fix it before you ever had to know." That sentence explained almost everything about him. He still believed the worst part was that I found out. Not that he had done it. "You used our anniversary." He looked down. "I know. You used Natalie." "I know. You were going to use a forged document to scare me into signing." Closed his eyes briefly. Yes. There was nothing left to investigate. No hidden explanation that would make the marriage recognizable again. Daniel looked at me. "Is there any chance we can repair this?" I thought about 11 years. The fundraiser. The cinnamon in my coffee. Christmas mornings. Ordinary Tuesdays. Not everything had been false. That almost made it harder. "No," I said. He nodded. No argument. 3 days later, I instructed my attorney to begin divorce proceedings. I expected grief. Came. But so did something else. Relief. Then Rebecca called me with news about the lender's investigation. The review had uncovered enough evidence that the matter was being referred for further legal scrutiny, while Northbridge's remaining property and debts would be handled through formal financial proceedings. But that wasn't why she was calling. "Claire," she said, "we finally know who created the first false document." I assumed she meant Evelyn. I was wrong. The digital record showed the original file had been created on Daniel's computer. Months before Evelyn ever submitted it. Reply next for Part 10. For several minutes after Rebecca told me, I said nothing. I was sitting in my car outside the hospital. My shift had ended 20 minutes earlier, but I hadn't driven home yet. Rainwater was drying in uneven lines across the windshield. "Are you sure?" I finally asked. "The metadata is clear," Rebecca said. The original document was created under Daniel's user account. There are later versions, but his is the earliest file we found. I thought about Robert's statement. Evelyn had forged my signature. That was still true. But the document itself had begun with Daniel. He had prepared the space where my signature would eventually appear. Whether he physically wrote it or not no longer mattered to me in the way I once thought it would. He had built the door. Evelyn had simply walked through it. The investigation continued for months. I learned not to expect dramatic endings from legal processes. There was no single afternoon when everyone responsible received exactly what they deserved. Instead, consequences arrived gradually. Northbridge lost control of its remaining commercial property through the debt resolution process. Robert's retirement savings took a serious loss. He and Evelyn separated. I heard through Megan that Robert moved into a small apartment near his office. Evelyn hired her own attorney. The disputed documents remained under legal review, and the lender pursued the people responsible rather than treating me as a willing participant. Daniel lost his position after his employer concluded that he had improperly used company resources and involved Natalie in outside business matters without proper authorization. My divorce took 8 months. The house was the most complicated part. Eventually, it was sold. After the legitimate mortgage and closing costs were paid, my share of the remaining equity was protected through the divorce settlement. My inheritance remained exactly where it had always been. Untouched. For years, Daniel had talked about that money as if leaving it alone were foolish. In the end, leaving it alone was one of the smartest decisions I had made. I rented a 2-bedroom townhouse 15 minutes from the hospital. It had a narrow kitchen, a small patio, and windows that caught the morning sun. For the first few weeks, I kept expecting silence to feel lonely. It didn't. Felt clean. Megan visited often. Our relationship survived because we stopped pretending family loyalty required shared denial. She started seeing a therapist. She stopped apologizing before asking simple questions. The first time she disagreed with me without immediately saying sorry, we both noticed. Neither of us mentioned it. We just smiled. Robert sent me a letter about a year after Charleston. It was 3 pages long. I read it once. He apologized for staying silent when he knew Evelyn and Daniel were crossing lines. He did not ask me to forgive him. That was probably why I kept the letter. Accountability sounds different when it doesn't demand a reward. Evelyn never contacted me again. Daniel did. On what would have been our 12th anniversary, he sent a short message. "I'm sorry for what I turned our marriage into. I hope you're doing well." I stared at it while my coffee cooled beside me. Then I deleted it. Not angrily. I simply had nothing left to add. People sometimes ask whether I regret not confronting Daniel sooner. I don't. If I had confronted him when Natalie first appeared at the hotel, I would have been arguing about the wrong thing. He would have defended the friendship. I would have questioned boundaries. We might have spent months debating whether his relationship with another woman was appropriate. Meanwhile, the real story would have remained hidden in folders, emails, loan applications, and signatures. That was the cleverest part of what Daniel did. He gave me something obvious to be angry about. Natalie. The phrase work wife. Her flight to Charleston. Her presence on our anniversary. All of it pulled attention toward jealousy. But jealousy had never been the real danger. The danger was trust being used as access. Access to my financial information. Access to my signature. Access to the assumption that if my husband placed a document in front of me, I didn't need to wonder who truly benefited. Working in intensive care taught me that one number rarely tells the whole story. You look for patterns. A change in breathing. A shift in blood pressure. Patient who suddenly becomes too quiet. My marriage had been giving me readings for years. The mortgage envelope disappearing into Daniel's briefcase. Evelyn asking about the title. The repeated interest in my inheritance. The refinancing page I refused to sign. The names on Northbridge. Natalie arriving with documents. None of those details alone told the whole truth. Together they did. 2 years after the divorce, I bought a small house. Nothing impressive. 2 bedrooms. A maple tree near the driveway. A kitchen with more windows than cabinets. The day I closed, I sat across from the attorney and read every page before signing. No one rushed me. No one laughed and called the paperwork boring. No one told me trust should make questions unnecessary. When I received the keys, I drove directly to the house. There was no furniture yet. I sat on the kitchen floor with a paper cup of coffee. It got cold while I watched afternoon light move across the empty room. For once, I didn't mind. I thought about Charleston. About the hotel door opening. About Natalie standing there with her suitcase. The time I thought she had arrived to ruin my anniversary. Now I understood she had accidentally interrupted something much more important. A plan that depended on me not looking closely. I used to think betrayal announced itself with a confession. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it arrives as ordinary paperwork placed quietly beside your dinner plate. And sometimes the life you save by finally reading the fine print is your own. END